Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle Dyer, and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, November 15th. Let me introduce you to this week's Insider panel. Patty is off this week, so first up, we have Alton Dillard, political analyst and media and public affairs consultant with the Dillard Group and former election spokesperson for the city and county of Denver. Sage Nauman, conservative columnist and commentator and strategist and owner of Anthem Communications. Ed Sealover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives with the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of The Sum and Substance. And lastly, Alvina Vasquez, an advocacy leader in Denver and member of the PBS 12 Community Advisory Board. We started this first full week post-election with the flip in Colorado's 8th congressional district. Last weekend, Gabe Evans pulled ahead from behind to defeat incumbent Yadira Caraveo. The flipping of that seat and others has led to the Republican trifecta in Washington, which led Governor Polis then to co-found and start promoting a new group of governors, which they say will safeguard democracy. And the timing of that came, Alton, just as all these announcements for, the administration were coming out. It has been a week, and something tells me it's going to be like this every week for some time.
Oh, yeah, we're going to have plenty to talk about. So going back to CD8 just briefly here, I found it a little interesting how Caraveo underperformed in Adams County, because a lot of people thought, since those are pretty much the last ballots being counted, that there's going to be a chance to make up that gap. But I think a little bit of the squishiness on the immigration issue and those ads essentially blaming her for the fentanyl crisis, whether they're true or not, they were effective. Now, to the part about what's going on in Washington, for everybody who was out there saying, oh, Trump's just out on the stump saying this to appeal to his base, now you see the names that are being put forward. That man means business. So folks are going to have to sort of buckle up, and it's going to be interesting to see if the momentum that the Democratic governors are trying to create, saying, hands off our state, is going to hold.
Mm-hmm. Sage, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, on CD8, I'd completely agree. The numbers out of Adams County were very interesting. And I think that, there were obviously a lot of reporters trying to break down the numbers, what was left in Weld, what was left in Adams, and they were kind of doing the math. And I think everyone kind of ended up being wrong at the end because the numbers just didn't break the way anyone thought they would. In regards to, the Trump administration's appointments, it is going to be a wild ride, whether it's, Matt Gaetz, obviously being, I think, the one that's really taken the headlines. Obviously, everyone's got an opinion on Matt Gaetz. Obviously, I don't think it's going to get through the Senate. But what I am really interested in seeing is what happens with Elon Musk and Vivek and this new department of, governmental efficiency, the DOGE. I honestly think it's going to be kind of interesting to watch. As someone who's watched with fascination what's happening in Argentina with Javier Milei, just dismantling the federal government. I'm a conservative. I believe our federal government and the bureaucracy is much too large, and so it'll be interesting to see if they actually make some progress on that. And it might be kind of fun to watch along the way, but that's what I'm most interested in seeing what happens in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. Ed?
Well, I'm interested in seeing what role Gabe Evans is going to play in Congress. I can't say I'm an expert on Congress, but having watched the legislature closely the last 2 years, what I know is that Gabe Evans was the House Republicans' point man on energy issues. He was fighting back against energy regulations. He was really actually pushing for the adoption of new technologies such as carbon capture. I think energy is an under-the-radar subject that is going to come up in this new Congress, and I'm curious to see, will Gabe Evans step into that role? Will he still be out there pushing for that? Meanwhile, what are the House Republicans going to do right here in Colorado, as everyone's focusing on the national House? But energy is clearly going to come up. In fact, actually, Michael Ogletree, who is the director of the Air Pollution Control Division, recently said at an Air Quality Control Commission meeting that he's already looking over 22 proposed bills that could affect air quality rules here in Colorado. So as the House's leader in that area moves on to Congress, be curious to see how the House is going to deal with these new air quality proposals.
Okay, all right. Alvina?
Well, CD8 is very interesting. It was built to be very kind of a toss-up every cycle. We might see this seat switch back and forth several times before it lands somewhere. I think it is interesting about the lack of support in Adams County, or the unexpected lack of support, because Adams County is very much a small town still. The relationships run very deep. And if you're not there long enough to build those relationships, it's going to be really hard to continue to keep that seat. Also, she took some challenging votes on immigration, which I think it's also, I think when you're in that seat, you have to decide, am I going to just get as much as I can get done on progressive policies and do the best that I can because I can lose this seat, or are you going to try to play the middle? And I think she tried to play the middle, and I don't think that it was a benefit for her campaign. I think she should have leaned in on more progressive policies.
When it comes to the state government, leadership elections were held this week. Okay. And State Senator Chris Hansen, who was reelected last week by a whole bunch, announced that he has accepted a new job. So we're talking about vacancy committees. Once again, let's start with you, Sage.
Yeah, vacancy committees are always exciting because they happen every week. We have talked about this a lot. I think it's now a third of our legislature is made up of legislators who were appointed via vacancy committee, and now we're going to have some more. Setting aside, Hansen himself, I think this is a great opportunity for him. I think he does have a lot of experience in this area. But again, we're seeing the situation where there is no risk whatsoever to making this move. And in fact, Hansen has come out and said that Sean Camacho, who is now representative-elect, just got elected to his first term, should now take his seat in the state Senate, meaning that if that all happens, there will then be a vacancy committee for his House seat. This game of musical chairs really does have to end, and I know that legislators have talked about a solution to it. There have been proposals on potential ballot measures, and this, I think, is the session where legislators should finally sit down and say, we're going to put forth a solution to this, because regardless of what the cost would be for special elections and how it would drag things out and picking a new person, these are districts with sometimes over 100,000 people that live in them being decided by groups of 20, 30, 40, 50 people in a room. But hopefully this session, legislators will step up and actually address it.
I think a week and a half out, we had been expected to be able to say, here's what the split is going to be. And it looks like it's going to be a 23-12 split in the Senate, which is the exact same margin as Democrats held the Senate last time. One Republican seat, one Democratic seat, each flipped, that'll be the same. There's a lot of questions that are going to come from this near status quo. Okay, what are we going to go for now? I think, had Democrats, if they had seen more momentum, they might kind of come back more and say, here are some policies that didn't make it through the last session that we may be talking about again. Things like single-payer health care studies, or things like allowance of rent control locally. Republicans, had they made big gains, might have come back and said, well, no, we want to push back against that. These aren't big gains, but it's enough to knock the Democrats out of their supermajority in the House if the Republicans hold with 22 members. And that's just going to cause more people to come to the negotiating table for issues from healthcare to labor. And it'll, I wish I had more answers to your questions, but frankly, when we're this far out and we're still counting votes, there's a reason. There's a lot of questions are going on about what comes from this and what comes the next couple of years.
Oh, okay. All right, Alina.
Well, I mean, you can talk about supermajority. I don't know if it's super relevant. Among the Democratic Party, there are ideological differences within the party. So nothing's going to be easy. In addition to that, their relationship with the governor is shifting depending on who's in leadership and who's not. So I think it's going to be interesting, but I don't think it's going to be, I don't think a supermajority really makes a difference. I mean, the Democrats are in charge. They're going to have to deal with each other in a different way than they would have if they had to work more with Republicans. But I still think ideologically there's a spectrum of views within the Democratic Party.
Okay.
Keep an eye on James Coleman, the new Senate president, because he's really considered to be a big bridge builder. Now, when it comes to to Alvina's point, the discussions of supermajority, my thing with that is maybe it will at least create an occasional illusion of bipartisanship. Because one of the things that I've said on this air before is that the Democrats are some of the worst that I've ever seen when it comes to majority politics. And they may want to take a page or two out of the Republican playbook and just say, this is how we're going to do it, and y'all can be on the right or not. So we'll see if that happens. And then also, to Alvina's point, we have to also factor in our libertarian governor and where he sort of factors into all this. And as far as Hansen and the vacancy thing, maybe it's time to make it something a little more full-time because, again, and I'm not getting up in anyone else's pocketbook, but if someone offered me a job paying between $400,000 to $600,000 a year, I'd have to look at that, especially if I had a family. So, not hating that part of it. So as I like to say, don't hate the player, hate the game when it comes to that.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about money some more and budgeting. The city of Denver and the state of Colorado are calling for belt tightening in 2025. On Tuesday, the Denver City Council unanimously approved a $4.4 billion budget, which is a skosh more than what was allocated for this year. So pretty conservative. But Ed, it is not so clean cut for state lawmakers in terms of what Governor Polis is planning in terms of budget cuts for this coming year.
Yeah, Governor Polis is trying to bridge what's about $1 billion shortfall in the budget, and he suggested $638 million in revenue additions or in budget cuts to go forward with that. I want to talk about one of them in particular because I think it's really fascinating for the business community, and that is he has proposed the idea of converting Pinnacle Assurance, which is the state-chartered workers' comp insurer of last resort. That is an insurer who gets special tax breaks in order to write policies for very risk-heavy companies that the private market won't cover. And he is talking about converting them to a fully privatized company in some sense. It's not just about what it can add to the budget, though he believes it could add $100 million to this year's budget, $80 to $100 million, the cost of conversion, to the next 4 budgets as well. But he thinks it's about keeping Pinnacle afloat. One of the restrictions Pinnacle has right now is it can't sell policies outside the state of Colorado. Well, the pandemic changed forever the way we look at growing outside the state and hiring workers who are not located within Colorado. The governor is really putting this forward as you want an insurer of last resort, which is some of the concerns that are out there, like what will this do to the insurer of last resort? He said, if you want that, Pinnacle needs to be sustainable and we need to do this for them. This is going to be a fascinating discussion that's going to affect an awful lot of businesses who are Pinnacle's customers.
Okay, all right, Alvina.
Budgets are always super interesting at the statewide level, but I also would ask our viewers to look at the budgets in their own communities because that is where decisions are made about school funding, a lot of MLOs that continue to fail, leaving school districts kind of hamstring for improvements in their districts. And so even though big picture, like all these budget conversations are happening, very little coverage is on city budgets. And so check your city council, check in with your city council about what's going on in your community. How can you testify or give commentary on the things that are important to you and to your community without getting sucked into the state budget process? Because a lot of that's going to be at the legislature.
Alden.
Yeah, because we also, in the context of the whole budgeting thing, we were talking about the fact that now the state's going to have to find some additional money to fund law enforcement. And see, there was a bit of a course correction after the murder of George Floyd, where people kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater and just said, okay, let's not give the cops any money to do anything. And then next thing you know, this beautiful purple mess of a state of ours said, yeah, we're going to do things like codify gay marriage. We're going to codify choice in our state constitution, but we're also going to start having people who commit heinous crimes serve the bulk of their sentence. We're also going to start saying no bail for people who are accused of first-degree murder if there's a certain preponderance of evidence. It shows that A, voters are tired of crime. B, they're tired of everyone hanging their hat on the pandemic as an excuse for why we turned into the Thunderdome as a society. And so it's going to be a matter of seeing how the rest of that course correction happens in the upcoming session.
So we're talking about Prop 130, which passed last week, which is to support law enforcement. And that's going to take money from a lot of other areas, isn't it? Okay. Your thoughts?
So, my column actually in the Gazette this weekend is about this specific issue, the state budget. And, the chair of the Joint Budget Committee, Jeff Bridges, who, I think is a great guy, he came out and said that Tabor is the reason we can't have nice things in the state of Colorado. And you can imagine as a conservative that I am, that doesn't make me too happy because in the last 4 years or so, we've added, I think it's about 3,500 employees to our state government payroll. We've created 15 new offices with 150 employees just for those, one of which is the Office of Financial Empowerment that perhaps our state legislatures should go visit since they're having a hard time with money. Look, the fact is that our legislature loves to spend a few nickels and dimes here and there and think, these are just little drops in the bucket, but they end up being long-term commitments. And I think that, I know Republicans on the Joint Budget Committee, Senator Barb Kirkmeyer, has warned against these type of long-term commitments. If you have one-time dollars coming in, spend it for a one-time project, a capital improvement project, something like that. Don't spend it on something that's going to basically put us in a situation like this where now we have to make cuts across the board. And so, quite frankly, I think the gaslighting when it comes to Tabor, I think is ridiculous. It happens every single time we have to make cuts. Our state government is not good at spending money. We have a spending problem. Our budget is bigger than it's ever been before, and yet we still never have enough.
So what do you all expect will happen this session? Because the governor wants cuts, and when he went before the Joint Budget Committee this week, people on his side, his Democratic side, also were questioning, what? How do you think this is all going to play out?
The governor made a very interesting statement. Jeff Bridges asked him, what are your alternatives? What are the things you looked at that you didn't put in your budget? And the governor said there were two main areas I looked at. One was a 40 to 50% cut in higher education funding, because that's one of the few non-protected areas of the budget. And the other was a 1 to 1.5% cut in the reimbursement rate for Medicaid providers. And right now he's catching flack from some people for even being flat in the reimbursement rate. So there's going to have to be some really hard choices made, and I think it's going to lead to a lot of discussion this year.
Okay. All right. Starting around this time next week, a lot of Coloradans will be gearing up, thinking towards Thanksgiving week. Between the holiday season and ski season, our highways are about to get very crowded, as you know. So CDOT is getting ready to expand dynamic tolling to express lanes. Alvina, this is supposed to ease congestion, but I don't know if most people realize that they may have to pay more, and that cost is going to fluctuate to scoot over into that express lane.
Yeah, I think for me, it all comes down to what is our state paying for? And if you don't want to pay taxes to cover the cost of streets, you're going to have to pay somehow. And so this dynamic tolling is to cover the costs of expanding our highways, making them more accessible. However, what happens is the people that can afford to get down to Vail will get down to Vail, and the have-nots will be stuck in traffic like everybody else, and it creates a system of inequality.
Mm-hmm. You laughing.
I'm laughing because that is an excellent point. There's a sort of a let them eat cake kind of vibe to that. Because you remember the old days when they first started referring to any kind of toll lanes as Lexus lanes? Remember those days when they first started using them? But to the threshold question, nothing's going to ease congestion. We've tried T-Rex, we've tried fast tracks, which is anchored by our kind of janky transit system. That hasn't made any difference. I-70, is getting a little better, but especially now we're through the point where the tunnel's no longer new, going past the Purina plant, and people aren't stopping to admire the tunnel. So we're getting a little bit of easing of congestion, but the fact is, and I'm not a no-growther, we have already outgrown our transportation infrastructure, and that is more and more people come here. That's why you have to get your transportation infrastructure out front of the growth instead of playing catch up. You can't build to catch up with growth.
I feel like we'll always be in catch up mode, right, with all the people moving here. So this has already been taking place on Central 70. So that's the I-25 to Chambers. And this, by the end of the year, this mountain track will be included with this dynamic tolling, as well as going south from Castle Rock to Larkspur, I think it is. Your thoughts on all this, sir?
It's quite a risk, as tolling always is, because people, if they don't see improvement, which you won't, you can't quantify like a 5% improvement. Like if people are still stuck in traffic, they're going to say they're stuck in traffic. So even if they are able to say, hey, we were able to, I think that most people are still going to see the traffic and they're not going to be happy about having to pay more. That being said, I do have to disagree with the notion that Coloradans aren't paying taxes, and therefore, if they're not willing to pay more in taxes, then they're going to have to pay for roads somehow. Our state budget has increased by 25% since Polis took office. Yet somehow roads and bridges are never the priority. We have had Democrats in the legislature, chairs of our transportation committee, say that their main goal is getting people off the roads. If your goal is getting people off the roads, guess what you're not doing? Building more of them. You're certainly not building them in anticipation for more traffic and more development happening. And so there has been this huge push for multimodal transportation to try to get people onto buses or trains or whatever it is and not fix and improve the roads. And now here we are, and they're congested, and the argument is, well, if you're not willing to pay for them, then we're going to have to pay for them somehow. I have to disagree with that notion. I think that Coloradans are paying. They're paying more in taxes than they ever have in the past. Our state budget is bigger than it's ever been in the past. Roads and bridges are just not the priority of our state legislature.
Okay.
I don't think Coloradans paid enough in taxes. I gotta say that. I just don't. I mean, mill levy overrides constantly get failed in communities, and communities are suffering because there's no ability to expand with the limited dollars that we have.
All right. Your thoughts, Ed?
I'm going to switch lanes a little bit here.
Oh.
See what I did. But I want to run off of Sage's point here. I think there is going to be more discussion this year in the legislature about getting people out of their vehicles. The Transportation Legislative Review Committee, which meets every offseason, had a lot of discussions this year about plans for that, possibly bring back the idea of an employee trip reduction program where large employers are responsible for reducing the single occupancy vehicle commutes that their employees make to and from work. There's been talk about an emissions limit on indirect sources. These are places like warehouses or even malls where a lot of cars will gather. How do we cut down on the numbers going into there? Even now that we have established a rule saying there doesn't have to be minimum parking for certain apartments that are going up, how about a maximum parking to limit the number of people who are driving cars to and from there? I think these discussions are going to be very big. There's not a bill that's been written yet on these, but it's expected to come forward. And I think that's going to be a big part of the transportation conversation that especially a lot of employers are going to be interested in.
So interesting. Okay. All right. Let's talk about some of the highs and the lows of this week. Alton, we'll start with you on a low point so you can end on a high note.
All right. My low goes back to election denialism. Again, I know people whose lives were turned upside down by that narrative, but now all of a sudden that the election results went a certain direction, now you don't hear that narrative anymore. And the hypocrisy of that is stunning.
Yeah, election deniers on the left. Thanks a lot, Alton. No, I mean, seriously, as somebody who has spoken out, and Alton, you've done this a great deal as well, against those on the right who constantly degrade our election system with no evidence whatsoever, we are seeing that from the left. And I've warned people that the cancer that has taken over the right, the left is not immune from it. And I think we're starting to see that, maybe not at the same level, but we're seeing it. And we're seeing it with a lot of prominent people, with a lot of followers, and a lot of people regurgitating it. And that makes me very nervous, especially for the future, not just for this presidency, but what happens in 4 years, 8 years, et cetera. And so, yeah, that's definitely a low point to see that happen. And now on the other side.
Okay.
It's understandable everyone's looking at America right now, but people need to cast their eyes as well to Amsterdam, where recently we've seen attacks on Jewish soccer fans and attacks by people chanting anti-Semitic remarks on a tram. This is a serious problem that the world needs to wake up to and pay attention to.
I'm really worried about this mass deportations. And with Gabe Evans and CD8, I don't know if he is strong-willed enough to fight back against that. I think it's bad for business. It's bad for the economy. Colorado has gone through it before. It suppresses economy because people stop going to work. Families are afraid to leave their homes. And so I hope that there's so much turnover, so many people getting in and out of the White House that it doesn't take place, but it's a big danger for our economy in Colorado.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about something good.
All right, well, something good. You'll notice that I've got a fairly cheesy start to a goatee going here. It is for Movember for Men's Health. I am now about 3.5 years into remission after radiation treatment for prostate cancer. And so I wanted to be able to participate in Movember. So men, sometimes everything's not all that dignified when it comes to these procedures, but get everything checked.
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, one thing that we did see this week on the political side that was good was Biden welcoming Trump to the White House, and doing so in a very cordial manner, extending to him grace that was not extended the other way around 4 years ago. Again, it's a very small thing. These things we shouldn't have to look at these and be like, oh goodness, look at this great thing, because that's historically how it's been done. That being said, I was glad to see them smiling in the same room and shaking hands. It's just not something you expect after this kind of a presidential election.
I want to give a shout out to Joseph Drexler, a Buena Vista middle schooler who competed for Colorado this week in the National Civics Bee. I had the honor actually of moderating the Civics Bee in Colorado in 2023. And this kid competed then. He was astute, he's thoughtful, he is an absolute future leader of our community, and we're proud to call him a Coloradan.
We might need to get him here on the table. What do you think? Yeah, right? Alvina?
I'm ready to start decorating for Christmas. I think I'm allowed now. So the next couple weekends, it's going to be all ho, ho, ho at my house.
Lights are going up outside this weekend at our house.
Yeah,
absolutely. My high is bittersweet, and that is the passing of former Rocky Mountain News and Denver Post writer and my friend Bill Husted. Bill was always curious, looking to get a scoop on something that nobody else had reported. He even had the words "tell me" on his license plate of his convertible. Bill wrote about every happening event in the Denver area and up in the mountains, and he would share the stories of people he interviewed in a captivating style. He was conversational in his writing, and he also had a knack for choosing such descriptive words that made his work stand out. Once he wrote about me as the morning pixie, referring to my time on the morning news. Who reaches for the word pixie when they're writing something, right? Bill was a wordsmith. Bill was keenly smart and funny. Bill Husted was a fixture in our state, and I will so miss seeing him around town, as so many of us will. Thank you, Insiders, for joining us this week. Thank you for watching at home or listening to our podcast. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.